At 3:15 in the afternoon, my name was called to the top floor. The glass-walled office of Marcus Weller, our CFO, had always felt cold. But that day, it might as well have been an execution chamber. He didn't even look up when I stepped inside. A printed form lay on his desk, already framed by a pen and a thin smile. "Angela," he began, voice smooth as if rehearsed. "We've reviewed expenses, effective immediately. Your salary will be reduced by 40%. Sign this acknowledgement, and we'll continue forward." I froze. The words blurred together. 17 years of work collapsed into a single sentence. I thought of the weekends sacrificed, the late nights combing through ledgers, while my daughter grew up in the next room without me. 40% just numbers to him. But my mortgage, her tuition, my dignity. When I didn't move, Marcus leaned back, lowering his voice as if extending an olive branch. "Look, I don't want to lose you. Just sign. And I'll keep you on. Think of this as a test of loyalty." A flicker of false hope surged through me, then dissolved as quickly as it came. His words were staged. The pen was already angled toward my hand, the form already prepared. I forced my gaze to meet his. No. Something sharpened in his eyes. With a small gesture, the office door opened. 2 security guards stepped in. Silent. Waiting. Marcus slid another sheet across the desk. This one stamped termination. "Then this is final," he said, louder this time, making sure the guards heard. The air drained from the room. My chest tightened. My ears rang with the mechanical detachment of it all. I pressed the pen down, not on his pay-cut form, but on the refusal line. A quick scratch of ink, the last mark I would make for CinnerCon. As I set the pen aside, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A system alert flashed across the screen. Red signature, revoked payroll authorization removed. My mark, the encrypted proof that validated every financial report, had just been erased. I stood there, stunned, paralyzed, realizing Marcus hadn't just ended my job. He had triggered something far larger than either of us understood. Today. I hope you're taking care of yourself, and while you're here, I'd love to know where are you watching from, if this story has already pulled you in. Don't forget to tap that like button and hit subscribe. That way, you won't miss the next chapter. The walk from Marcus's office to the ground floor felt longer than the 17 years I had worked in that building. The 2 guards flanked me on either side, their footsteps heavy and rehearsed, as though they had walked countless others out before me. My heels clicked against the marble, each sound echoing like a hammer in a courtroom. This wasn't an exit. It was a spectacle. As we stepped into the open hallway, I felt dozens of eyes dart my way. Some pretended to scroll on their phones. Others bent closer to their screens, as if buried in urgent work. But the silence was deafening. Every glance carried a weight pity from a few, discomfort from others, and worst of all, the thin smirk of satisfaction from those who had waited for this moment. The humiliation came in waves. A young analyst near the elevator raised his phone just high enough to snap a photo, thinking I wouldn't notice. A muffled laugh followed. Seconds later, I saw him posted on the company's internal chat Legend of Finance, escorted like a thief. The caption burned worse than the picture. I had carried that department on my back for years, kept the company out of regulatory fires more times than I could count. And now, I was a meme. I wanted to turn, to confront him, to remind him that the only reason he had a job was because I had once stayed until midnight fixing a payroll disaster that nearly eliminated half his department. But my throat locked. Words wouldn't come. That was the cruelest part of humiliation. It steals your voice before you can defend yourself. We passed by a row of desks where the senior staff sat. My eyes searched, almost desperately, for one familiar face. And I found it Harold, a man in his late 50s, who years ago had nearly been forced out during budget cuts. I had fought to keep him, presenting data that proved his role was indispensable. That night, he had shaken my hand with tears in his eyes, promising he would never forget. Now he sat frozen, his shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on a spreadsheet that didn't matter. When our eyes met, he looked away, as if the numbers on his screen demanded his attention more than the woman who once saved his career. My chest tightened. That cut deeper than the smirk of the analyst or the silence of the others. It was proof that fear was stronger than gratitude. The guards guided me through the lobby, past the reception desk I had walked by 1,000 times. For years. I had entered with a badge that opened every door. Today, my badge was dead plastic in my purse. Heads turned as the elevator chimed behind us. The walk across the polished floor to the glass doors felt like a parade of shame, each step stripping away the dignity I had left. When the doors closed behind me, I stood in the brisk air, heart pounding. Inside, whispers spread like wildfire. My body trembled not from anger yet, but from the raw sting of humiliation. When I finally made it home, the silence of my apartment pressed harder than the noise of the office ever had. I set my purse on the table, hands still trembling, and reached for my laptop. The machine whirred to life, and almost instantly, a notification pulsed across the screen, signature mismatch. Red signature not found. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That small line of text meant more than any insult Marcus could have thrown at me. It was confirmation. My red signature, the encrypted key I had designed years ago to validate every financial report, was gone. Erased as if I had never existed inside Cinercon's walls. I remembered the night I built it. An intern had manipulated expenses, nearly costing us millions. The chaos that followed made me swear never to let false numbers pass through unchecked again. So, I embedded a safeguard. Every report required my active payroll status, paired with my red signature. If either vanished, the system flagged the data as fraudulent. It was my invisible fingerprint, my promise that the numbers were true. And Marcus, in his arrogance, had just deleted it. The bitter irony sank deep. They thought they had humiliated me, stripped me of authority, but what they didn't know was that in removing my signature, they had amputated the very limb the company balanced on. My chest ached, not with triumph yet, but with a pressure I could hardly contain. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My daughter, Sophie, appeared in the doorway, her arms folded tight. "So, it finally happened," she said, her tone sharper than I expected. Her words stung more than Marcus's smirk ever could. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "You missed my birthday last year," she said, eyes glistening but voice unflinching. "You stayed at the office until midnight to sign one of those reports. You told me it was more important, that it kept the company alive, and now they've thrown you out like trash." I swallowed hard, unable to argue. The truth was carved into her voice, raw and unforgiving. I had chosen the company again and again, thinking the sacrifices meant something, and now the people I bled for had erased me with a signature line. The weight in my chest tightened further. "What in hen?" I wanted to scream, to tear at the walls, to rage against Marcus and the whole cold machine. But all I could do was sit there, jaw clenched, nails digging into my palms, holding the storm inside. Sophie's voice softened after a pause. "You gave them everything. Mom, maybe it's time you stop." Her words landed heavy, but somewhere inside the knot of anger, I felt a flicker of release. The system was already reacting to the missing signature, and Marcus would soon discover what he had really erased. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, my laptop open as the sun crept reluctantly through the blinds. The apartment was too still. Yet the digital world beyond was anything but. My inbox was flooding with automated alerts, each one repeating the same message, red signature not detected. Data flagged as fraudulent. At first, I thought it might take days for the cracks to show, but by mid-morning in Europe, the first fissure had already widened into something undeniable. London bondholders reported that Cinercon's filings could not be verified. Frankfurt followed within the hour. tagging their exposure as high risk. The screen in front of me glowed red with warning messages. A digital storm breaking open. Anxiety coiled in my stomach like a tightened spring. This wasn't a plan I had triggered manually. It was simply the consequence of their arrogance. And yet, as the alerts stacked higher and higher, I felt a faint, guilty satisfaction. The very safeguard they mocked me for building was now devouring the house they had thrown me out of. At 10:15 a.m., a breaking notice appeared: Central Continental Bank declines renewal of Synercon credit facility. I leaned forward, reading it twice to make sure. One of their largest European lenders had refused to extend their line of credit. Without that safety net, liquidity would dry up fast. I set the mug down before my hands could shake the coffee across the table. The phone buzzed. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus himself. But the name on the screen stopped me: Daniel Harris, an old colleague from the audit team, someone who had once trusted me more than anyone else in that tower. I answered, my voice low. "Daniel, Angela," he whispered, almost breathless. "What's happening? Reports are collapsing. Red signature is missing from every sheet. They're panicking." I closed my eyes. "You know what that means. The system doesn't lie." A pause, heavy and uncertain. Then his tone dropped even further. "If they knew I was calling you, I'd be out the door too." "You understand?" My throat tightened. Even now, fear was the language of that building. Gratitude, loyalty, those things had no currency left. "I understand," I said softly. "Angela, is there a way back?" His voice carried a desperation he didn't dare make louder. I looked at the cascading alerts on my screen, the bright red warnings piling one on top of another. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless, not unless they undo what they did to me. I answered, "And you know they won't." The line went quiet. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Then God help them." Before hanging up, I stared at the phone, heart racing, caught between dread and a dark, undeniable relief. For the first time, Synercon was bleeding and I hadn't lifted a finger. What do you think will happen next? Will Synercon find a way to patch the damage? Or is this just the first crack in their downfall? Stay with me until the end, you won't want to miss how it all plays out. By mid-afternoon, Synercon was in full crisis mode. Reports of fraudulent data had spread across 2 continents, and Marcus Weller, the CFO who thought he could silence me with a single form, was scrambling to control the fire. He called an emergency meeting, dragging the entire finance floor into the largest conference room. On the surface, his tone was confident, even mocking. "This is nothing more than a technical glitch," he declared, pacing in front of the screens as if authority could erase truth. "Our IT junior mishandled an update to the authentication system. The red signature is temporarily disabled, but operations are stable. There is no fraud." I could almost hear his voice through the walls I no longer walked. That familiar arrogance, smooth, calculated, but already cracking around the edges. The bitterness in me swelled like acid. He wasn't just covering his tracks. He was handing blame to a nameless junior who had no power to defend themselves. I knew that tactic well. It was Marcus's favorite shield: use the weak as scapegoats, then watch them burn in silence. But the walls of Synercon were thinner than he believed. By early evening, a leaked email made its way through the very networks he thought he controlled. The message was his. Sent just a day earlier: remove Hughes from payroll immediately. Confirm all access revoked. The words spread like wildfire, carried in whispers, forwarded in secret. The staff now knew the truth. Marcus hadn't stumbled into a glitch, he had erased me with deliberate intent. And in doing so, he had gutted the only safeguard keeping their world intact. I imagined the ripple in that room as people checked their phones under the table, eyes narrowing at their CFO. The silence that follows exposure is always louder than shouting. I knew it because I had lived it when people fear the truth but can't deny it any longer. In hushed corners, employees began connecting the dots. If the red signature was gone, then every report, every quarterly sheet, every regulatory filing was void. The company's credibility wasn't just dented, it was vaporized, and no scapegoat could patch that kind of hole. From my apartment, bitterness tightened my jaw as I read the forwarded leak. Part of me wanted to laugh at his unraveling, but the larger part ached. Not for Marcus, he deserved every consequence, but for the quiet staff now drowning in the mess he created. They were the same people who had once trusted my signature to keep their jobs secure. Now, they were caught in a storm fueled by his arrogance and my erasure. I shut the laptop slowly, the glow of the leaked email still burning in my mind. Marcus had tried to rewrite the story. Instead, he had written his own confession, and soon, the world outside those walls would read it too. By the next morning, the system that Marcus had sworn was stable began to unravel in ways even he couldn't disguise. From my apartment, I watched the feeds trickle in on a half-lit laptop screen, the glow reflecting against the untouched coffee beside me. Lines of data were duplicating themselves, numbers folding and unfolding like shadows. The system was spitting out ghost entries, transactions that didn't exist, accounts that led nowhere, balances that ballooned and then vanished. It was the digital version of panic, and Synercon's servers were choking on it. I stared at the cascading errors with the kind of calm that only comes after years of warnings no one listened to. I had built the safeguard to prevent this very nightmare. For years, I had raised my voice, telling boardrooms that over-reliance without validation would be their downfall. But no one wanted to hear that the walls could collapse. Now, the walls were falling in on them. At 11 o'clock, the first headline broke across the financial networks: Synercon accused of falsifying records. The words carried weight heavier than any algorithm. I knew the moment the story went live. The stock wasn't just vulnerable, it was radioactive. Screens across Wall Street would turn red in unison. Not because of me, but because investors feared the stink of fraud more than anything. Coldly, almost clinically, I opened a second window and pulled up the ticker, just as expected. Synercon's shares dipped sharply within minutes, then nosedived as trading accelerated. I could picture Marcus in the conference room, tie loosened, shouting at a PR manager to control the narrative. But the narrative was gone. It was being written by journalists now, stamped into public record with the authority of headlines. By noon, U.S. hedge funds had smelled blood. They weren't waiting for explanations. Sell orders flooded the exchange, one after another, until the dominoes tipped into freefall. Major investment firms pulled out, citing unacceptable risk exposure. The speed of it was almost surgical: cold numbers chasing colder fear. And me, I just sat back in my chair, watching it unfold like I was outside the storm. I wasn't cheering, not gloating, just observing with a kind of detached heaviness. The house of cards I had once steadied with my red signature was toppling exactly the way I had warned it would. I thought about the meeting years ago, when I had begged them to fund better internal audits. Marcus had laughed, called me paranoid. "No one checks the guardrails if the road looks smooth," he'd said, smug in his short-term victories. Well, the road had finally cracked, and the guardrails were gone. My phone buzzed on the table. Another alert: trading halt considered. Synercon volatility exceeds threshold. I exhaled slowly, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was inevitability. The irony gnawed at me as I watched their empire unravel line by line. I hadn't lifted a hand against them. I hadn't sent a single malicious command. All I had done was refuse to be erased quietly. They had erased me, and the system had responded in kind. For the first time in days, I leaned back and closed my eyes. The chaos wasn't mine to fix anymore. It was theirs to endure, and the world to witness. The phone rang just past midnight. For a long moment, I considered letting it buzz itself into silence, but curiosity tugged at me. When I answered, the line was filled with a voice I hadn't expected to hear so soon. "Angela," Marcus said, his tone stripped of its usual arrogance. "We need you. Just reset the red signature. I'll reinstate you immediately." Double your salary. Whatever it takes. The bitterness rose in me like bile. Just days ago, I had been escorted out as if I were disposable. Now, in the middle of the night, he spoke as though he were offering me a favor. I let the silence hang until he grew impatient. Angela, did you hear me? His voice cracked on my name. Yes, I said at last. Cold and even. I heard every word, twice the pay. After you cut me down to nothing. In the background, muffled voices stirred. I sharpened my ears, catching fragments through the static. Lawyers. Their polished cadence was unmistakable. They were coaching him, whispering instructions, reminding him what to say. It hit me, then the desperation wasn't entirely his. This was a negotiation staged in a boardroom full of attorneys. They weren't asking me to restore the system out of respect. They were laying a trap. If I came back, they would spin the story the meltdown caused by a disgruntled employee tampering with controls. I would become the scapegoat, the final line in their false narrative. A laugh slipped from my lips before I could stop it. Bitter and sharp. I can hear them. Marcus, you're lawyers. You still think you can rewrite this story, don't you? That somehow, I'll step back in and let you pin this disaster on me. His tone hardened, but the cracks showed. Angela, don't be unreasonable. The company needs you. You built this system, you can fix it. I built it, I said slowly, to prevent exactly this kind of fraud, and you erased me. Now you want me to carry the blame. As I spoke, a memory flashed, one I had buried for years. A black tie gala, 5 years earlier. Marcus stood on stage, a glass award in his hand, smiling for the cameras as he accepted recognition for excellence in corporate finance. The applause echoed while I stood in the back, unseen, clutching the report I had written that saved the company millions. He never mentioned my name once. Not to the board, not to the press, not even to me. That night had left a hollow taste in my mouth. Tonight, the same bitterness returned, sharper and more cutting. You once held up a trophy built on my work, I said quietly. Now you're holding a crumbling company built on my signature. Funny how quickly the applause dies. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed. Marcus was still the same man, desperate to protect his image even as the empire fell. I ended the call without another word. My phone lay on the table, screen dark, while I sat there with a smile that wasn't joy, but something harder, something earned. 24 hours later, the collapse was absolute. From my apartment, the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I stared at the laptop screen. The system I had once balanced with my red signature had devoured itself, line by line, until there was nothing left but rubble made of code. Every transaction, every account, every ledger entry had been branded fraudulent. It was no longer a question of stability, it was a declaration of death. Trading froze in New York before the closing bell. Europe had already bled red across its screens. Tokyo had pulled the plug before dawn. The empire Marcus had built on arrogance and shortcuts fell in less than a single business day. My chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm as I watched the chaos unravel. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Just a kind of stunned quiet. As though I were witnessing a funeral I had already prepared for, but never imagined would actually arrive. The breaking news banners cut across the television. Synercon systems compromised, investors flee. Anchors spoke with the rehearsed calm of professionals masking hysteria. But their voices could not soften the reality billions evaporated in hours. Trust erased in seconds. Then came the twist that silenced even me. Live on air. It was confirmed the CEO himself had been locked out of the system. He had attempted to log in during an emergency press call, only to be denied access. The screen had demanded what no one else could provide: my red signature. The camera caught the flash of panic on his face, his lips tightening as he tried to recover, but the damage was done. The image went viral within minutes. I leaned back in my chair, fingers pressed against my lips, almost in disbelief. Even the highest office in the company had been reduced to a spectator. powerless before a system they had dismissed as Angela's unnecessary complication, as if the spectacle needed more fuel. One of the largest U.S. investment funds delivered the final blow. On live television, their spokesperson spoke with surgical precision. "We cannot, and will not, trust any report lacking red signature verification." Until then, Synercon is not a credible institution. The words echoed louder than any crash. They weren't just withdrawing capital. They were branding the company unworthy of trust. It wasn't just investors who heard it. It was the entire world. I sat frozen, laptop humming, television light flickering against the walls. My body trembled not from excitement, but from the weight of it all. Years of warnings, years of being ignored, years of sacrifice, all crystallized in one irreversible moment. Silence filled the room after the broadcast ended. Outside, the city moved on, cars honking, life spilling forward. But in that quiet apartment, I felt time stop. For the first time, Synercon stood where I had been just days earlier, stripped, humiliated, and voiceless. The following afternoon, I found myself in a quiet cafe on the corner of Maple Street, the kind of place I had rarely allowed myself to visit while chained to Synercon's endless deadlines. The aroma of roasted beans lingered in the air, soft jazz playing low. While sunlight spilled across the wooden tables, my daughter sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, for the first time in years. I wasn't rushing, checking my phone, or apologizing for being late. I was simply there, on the television mounted above the counter. The news anchors replayed Synercon's collapse with grim fascination. Stock tickers still streamed red. Headlines spoke of lawsuits, resignations, and shareholder fury. The same empire that had discarded me now served as the nation's favorite cautionary tale. Customers in the cafe glanced up occasionally, shaking their heads. But for me, the noise felt distant, like thunder on the horizon. My phone vibrated against the table. A new message glowed on the screen. "Angela. Ready to work together." The sender was an investor I had crossed paths with years ago, a man who once respected my insistence on rigorous compliance when others rolled their eyes. Now, in the wake of disaster, he was reaching out directly, not to Marcus, not to the board, but to me. I let the words sink in, not with surprise, but with quiet recognition. Value, I realized, wasn't measured in titles or paychecks. It was measured in trust. And though they had tried to erase me, the people who truly mattered hadn't forgotten who had kept the numbers clean. Sophie leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You know, Mom," she said softly, "you missed so many moments. Birthdays, holidays. I used to think you cared more about that company than about me." Her voice didn't carry anger, only honesty. She paused, then added, "But at least this time, you're here. You're with me. And that matters more." Her words pierced deeper than any headline. I reached across the table, taking her hand. "I can't change what I missed," I whispered, "but I can change what comes next." For the first time in days, a sense of peace settled over me. Not the sharp satisfaction of revenge, but the gentle relief of release. The world could watch Synercon burn. I no longer needed to. I had a different fire to tend to my own life, my own family. The call came just as the evening sun slipped beneath the skyline, painting the apartment in amber light. I didn't need to see the number to know who it was. Marcus's voice trembled the moment I answered. "Angela," he rasped, desperation thick in his throat. "Please, I'm begging you, restore the red signature. The board investors, everyone. They're threatening to walk. I'll do anything. Just help me fix this." For a heartbeat. I listened to the sound of his shallow breaths. The same man who had once smirked as he erased me with a stroke of his pen. Now, that arrogance had collapsed into panic. My own voice emerged calm, colder than I had imagined possible. "You cut my salary to save thousands. Now you've lost hundreds of millions. That's the only report my red signature ever needed." The silence on his end stretched painfully long. as though the words had carved the last thread he had left. Then the line went dead, leaving only the quiet hum of the city through my window. I set the phone down and turned back to the laptop. A new notification blinked on the screen, an incoming contract signed digitally by one of the largest investment groups in New York. Consulting agreement confirmed. Immediate engagement. I exhaled, a laugh breaking free. Not sharp or bitter this time, but light, after years of being overlooked, erased, and replaced. I was no longer a discarded employee. I was an independent voice, trusted and valued on my own terms. The weight I had carried for 17 years' loyalty, sacrifice, silence finally slid from my shoulders. Sophie peeked into the room, curious at my sudden smile. "Good news," she asked. "The best," I said, turning the screen toward her. She read the words, then looked at me with pride I hadn't seen in her eyes for years, for once. The story wasn't about survival. It was about starting again stronger, freer, and undeniably mine. Some endings are louder than revenge. They're the quiet sound of freedom. When you refuse to be erased, you become the author of your own story. Share your thoughts below. And if this story struck a chord, hit like, pass it along to someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of betrayal, justice, and redemption.